Hello, class. So we're talking about how it is that we could address the specific questions that I've asked you about in the readings. So the first question is, what is ethics in general? How are reason and conscientiousness understood in relation to ethics? What is meant by the term normative? So, first thing in mind, I've said this a few times already, be sure that you take into account this grading criteria, the basic grading criteria for all written work, okay? Because in this, I'm noticing that there are already students that are making some of these mistakes. So the first one we want to keep track of is the first criteria. Your written work must accord with the points in the readings, videos, screencasts, etc. Your points must answer the questions, not just reword the question. Okay, so that is key because I've noticed that some of the students are not looking at the reading. Okay, so you must read the PDF, the SOAS University of London PDF on what is ethics, and then do the homework. Okay, and then likewise you want to read through these. So I teach at other colleges, so if you're looking at this and you're not at CCA, just know that I teach the same class at different colleges, and then also this would include my environmental ethics classes, by the way. Okay. So then let's go to the PDF. So that's the first thing. In other words, that's the first mistake students make, is they will answer the questions. In other words, they'll look at this homework and think, what is ethics in general? Okay, or how are reason and conscientiousness understood in relation to ethics? So I'm asking you that question so that you can answer it after you've read this, okay? So be sure to read this, okay? Then, let's see. Now let's go to the first question. What is ethics in general? Oh, and the other thing too that I'm noticing is that a lot of students are not writing to the word count. So do not think that less is more here, okay? And then also don't think that writing so much is good either. Because I've noticed that there are a few students where the examples are too much. In other words, there's too much of an example and it gets in the way of your point. The other point to make too is that the examples are often not ethical. In other words, when students offer examples, they're talking about their everyday lives in a way that is not necessarily having to do with ethical choices. Okay? So the question is, what is an ethical choice? You have to ask yourself that before you write down your example. And as I indicate in the grading criteria, the examples should be kept to a bare minimum. Usually what will happen is students will offer their example and it gets crazy, and then before you know it, it's just writing about an example, okay? That oftentimes isn't even ethical, okay? And then in my environmental ethics classes, oftentimes they're not even having to do with the environment, okay? So you want to really think about that, those elements. So number one, am I doing the reading before I'm answering the questions? Am I writing to the word count? Am I getting carried away with my examples? And are my examples kept to a bare minimum. In other words, I'm asking you for a bare bones answer to the question. I'm not asking you to give me examples, really. Okay. As a matter of fact, if you could avoid giving me examples, that's good. We do so when we're in class and in conversation, but in your writing, there usually isn't enough room. If you can give an example, do it very briefly, okay, in very few words, and make sure it's ethical, okay? And if you don't know what that is, you should know what that is, okay? All right, so what is ethics in general? The big mistake with this is, so here we're turning to the reading, here it is. We go to what I have signed, and by the way, too, even before we get to what I assigned, notice here, this unit provides an introduction to the study of ethics, okay? So in other words, this word study is key because this is the term that students have missed a lot in the assignment, okay? As a matter of fact, I'd say probably around 75% of all the homework I looked at missed that ethics is a study, okay? So here we're on page 8. The study of ethics belongs primarily with the discipline of philosophy in the subdiscipline of moral philosophy, and so our accounts begin there. Okay, now one of the points that students will make is somehow that ethics has to do with rules and regulations, that sort of thing. That's true, but that's only one part of it. So in other words, what we're looking at is also how it is that human beings ought to live their lives about what is right or wrong. It's the study of that, okay? It's the study of belief systems. It's the study of systematic and rational consideration of human systems of belief, etc. Okay? And the key words here are rational, study, also ethics, and know that this is also a branch of philosophy. So make sure that your answers include a lot of those points, okay? Or all of those points. Then, what's the next question? So, how are reason and conscientiousness understood in relation to ethics? Okay, so here we're detailing what is philosophy, in case students don't know what philosophy is. So notice that these authors that wrote this text from the SOAS University of London keep writing. So through the study of ethics, and remember this is a study, this is what we're doing, okay, as students of ethics, okay. Then let's go, what is ethics? Again, it's a branch of philosophical study that focuses on ethics, is concerned with studying or building up a coherent set of rules or principles by which people ought to live, okay? So people kind of reworded this, but it usually came out something like ethics is about rules and regulations. It's more than that, okay? One part that it's having to do with a lot is the theoretical understanding. So how it is that when we're saying that it's about rules and regulations, we're understanding how those rules and regulations are understood theoretically as well, okay? Also looking at the systematic way in which we understand ethics, okay, etc. Okay, so less is not more. Okay? So we keep going down. We've read through all this. So here, these are the three main branches of ethical study. Okay, meta-ethics, normative ethics, applied ethics, etc. Okay, so moral sentiments and principles. Okay, so here we have the study of ethics involves reasoning about our feelings. In other words, it involves making sense of our rationalizing making sense of and rationalizing our intuitions about what's right and good. Almost all people, to a greater or lesser extent, are capable of experiencing feelings of empathy toward others. Empathy provides us with a sense of what others are feeling and may thereby allow us to identify with other people. Empathy gives us what Trayer refers to as moral sentiments, and ethical reasoning about these sentiments gives us our moral principles. The integration of these moral sentiments and principles, Trayer argues, is our conscience. Okay? Conscience. So, in other words, it's the combo. Conscience has to do with the combination of our reason and our sentiments. Sentiments there basically means emotions, feelings, okay, the way we feel about something. Okay, so in other words, how it is that we're understanding what reason is as well. Okay, so when we look at reason, we go down here, and a lot of people included this stuff, but then they overlooked this part about reason, this part about sentiments, intuition, and emotion. Okay, so that's what I'm looking for when I'm referring to conscience. Okay, conscientiousness. I also noticed that people mistake conscientiousness for consciousness. Okay, so we're not talking about consciousness, although one is conscious while we're conscientious. Still, don't get distracted with that. Just think conscientiousness. Notice here, conscience, or I'd like to poke fun at the word a little bit and think of it as conscience. Okay, so that's key. Remember, conscience is not necessarily the same thing as consciousness. Okay. Then let's go to our next question. What is meant by the term normative? Okay, so what is meant by the term normative? I found that here. In normative ethics, in contrast, normative ethics in contrast is the study of ethical acts. It therefore focuses explicitly on questions of what is the right thing to do. In general, normative ethics is concerned with questions of what people ought to do and on how people can decide what the correct moral actions to take are. Okay? And if we expand that even more, I've noticed that students are writing something like, well, when we look at the word, it means something like normative. The base of that must mean normal. And that's true, but you don't want to get distracted with that. And the reason why is because the right thing to do, or what we ought to do, is not always what people do. In other words, it's not always what is normal, okay? In other words, excellent ethics doesn't always involve what is normal, so don't get distracted with that. Although there is that meaning of it, you want to try to think more about standards and principles, what we ought to do, and then more specifically, this doesn't expand on it. I think I touch on it a little bit on the video, but normative ethics has to do with the theoretical way in which we understand what we ought to do, okay? So, like when we're looking at a particular philosopher, we're looking at his or her systematic way in which we understand what we ought to do. Such a study is normative, okay? Remember, this is a study, okay? So, again, we're going back to this idea that we're studying this, etc. Okay, so that's normative ethics. So I would think that that should give you a good start on those 3 questions. Remember to write to the word count. Remember to do the reading first and foremost and go back to it as much as you need to. You don't ever want to think that you're just answering the questions out of the blue, okay? Because that will not, that's not good. And I could tell right away that students haven't done the reading when they answer the questions, okay? In that way. So why don't we start from there, and I'll talk to you later. So that should help with some general tips on how to answer those first questions. Okay? Thank you.